A badge decides who belongs here. Officer Daniel Mercer said it with his palm resting on the silver shield pinned to his chest, loud enough for the whole federal courthouse hallway to hear. The line at security slowed, then stilled. Shoes stopped squeaking on the polished marble. A clerk holding coffee froze halfway through a sip. Even the guard beside the metal detector looked down, as if the floor had suddenly become safer than the truth. In front of Mercer stood Naomi Coleman, a black woman in a plain gray coat, carrying an old brown leather briefcase with scratched corners and a brass lock dulled by years of use. She was 5'6", maybe a little taller in her low black heels, but she stood with the kind of stillness that made taller people feel suddenly unsure of themselves. Behind her, a young mother named Tasha Reed hugged a folder of custody papers against her chest. Her little girl clung to her coat sleeve, silent, wide-eyed, watching the badge gleam under the courthouse lights. Mercer glanced at Tasha first, then at Naomi, and his mouth curved with the tired confidence of a man who had been obeyed too often. "This entrance is for court business," he said, "not for people wandering in because they saw a sign outside." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody wanted trouble before 9 a.m. in a building with cameras, armed officers, and judges only an elevator ride away. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not reach into her pocket. She did not say who she was. She only looked at Mercer's badge, then back at his eyes. "Then I hope yours remembers the truth," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Mercer's smile disappeared by half an inch. The air changed. It was not anger yet. It was the cold moment before anger chooses a costume. "Excuse me?" he asked. Naomi turned slightly and placed herself between Mercer and Tasha, not blocking him, not touching him, just standing there like a door that had decided not to open for cruelty. "She has a hearing in 9 minutes, Naomi said. "Let her pass." Tasha whispered, "It's okay. I can wait." But her fingers tightened around the papers so hard the edges bent. Mercer noticed. Men like Mercer always noticed fear. It told them where to press. He stepped closer, his boots stopping inches from Naomi's briefcase. "You giving orders now?" he asked. Naomi's face stayed calm, but inside, she heard her father's voice, low and steady from a kitchen table in Baltimore. "Never argue with power when truth can outlive it." The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Somewhere beyond the security gates, a courtroom door opened and closed. Mercer pointed toward the inspection table. "Search the bag," he said. Naomi slowly set the old briefcase down on the marble, and as the brass lock clicked open, Mercer had no idea he was standing at the edge of his own undoing. The guard hesitated before touching the briefcase, as if some quiet part of him understood that old leather did not always mean ordinary. Naomi watched his gloved hands move through the contents with careful discomfort. A legal pad, a fountain pen with a worn black barrel, a sealed folder stamped with a federal emblem, a photograph tucked behind a clear sleeve, showing a younger Naomi standing beside an older black man in a brown suit outside a courthouse much smaller than this one. The man in the picture had one hand on her shoulder and the other wrapped around the same briefcase. His name had been Marcus Coleman, and for 27 years, he had walked into rooms where people mistook patience for weakness. He had been a public defender in Baltimore, not famous, not rich, never invited to speak on television, but he had carried the law like a lantern through neighborhoods where people often met justice only after it had already failed them. Naomi had been 12 when she first sat in the back of a courtroom and watched her father defend a teenager everyone else had already decided was guilty. She remembered the smell of old wood, copier ink, rain on wool coats, and fear sitting in the room like another person. Her father had not shouted. He had not performed. He had asked one question at a time until the truth slowly stopped hiding. That day, walking home in the cold, he told her that power loved volume, but justice preferred patience. Naomi had never forgotten it. Years later, after scholarships, night jobs, 3 buses across town, and law school exams taken on less sleep than most people needed to drive safely, she became the kind of attorney her father had once pointed to from the courthouse steps and called necessary. But she never learned to look expensive. She still wore simple coats, still kept her nails short, still carried his old briefcase because the handle remembered his hand. That morning in Richmond, she had arrived early for a reason. The hearing was not routine. Behind the sealed folder was an 8-month civil rights investigation into Officer Daniel Mercer, a man whose reports always sounded clean while the people in them sounded invisible. Naomi had read every line, every pattern, every quiet gap between what Mercer claimed and what cameras showed. She knew his name before she saw his face. She knew his badge number before he placed his hand over it like a crown. But when Mercer used that badge to corner Tasha Reed, Naomi made a choice her father would have understood. She let him reveal himself before the court ever called his name. The guard lifted the sealed folder slightly, saw the markings, and his face changed. Mercer noticed the shift and frowned. Naomi gently reached down, closed one side of the briefcase, and said, "Careful with that." Her voice was soft, but something in it made the hallway colder. Mercer leaned in, trying to read the folder from where he stood. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face. Mercer saw the change in the guard before he understood the reason for it, and that bothered him more than Naomi's calm. He was used to being the only person in a hallway who could make people lower their voices. For 18 years, Daniel Mercer had worn his uniform like a second body, pressed sharp, boots polished, nameplate straight enough to reflect light. Local reporters called him disciplined. Retired officers called him old school. Younger cops watched how judges greeted him, how prosecutors nodded when he entered a room, how defendants looked away before he even spoke. In Richmond, his name carried weight, especially in neighborhoods where weight usually meant pressure. He had learned early that a clean report could erase a messy truth if the right people signed it. He had learned that a confident tone could turn uncertainty into fact. He had learned that when a man with a badge said he feared for order, most rooms stopped asking what order had cost. That morning, he was not supposed to feel exposed. He was scheduled to testify in a federal hearing his attorney had described as political noise, another attempt to punish a good officer for doing a hard job. Victor Harlan, his lawyer, had promised him the government had fragments, complaints, old body camera clips, and emotional witnesses, nothing that could break a career built on service awards and commendation letters. Mercer believed him because belief was easier than memory. He remembered traffic stops that went too long. He remembered reports rewritten in quieter language. He remembered faces at the edge of dashboard camera frames, people asking why they were being treated like suspects before any question had been asked. But those memories never followed him into court. Courtrooms had always been different. Courtrooms had wood panels, flags, polished tables, and rules that made fear sound professional. In court, Mercer became Officer Mercer, not Daniel, not a man with grudges, not a man who enjoyed being obeyed, but a public servant with a straight spine and a practiced pause before every answer. That was why he had smiled when he saw Naomi at the entrance. The gray coat, the worn briefcase, the quiet face, the protective way she stood near Tasha Reed. To him, she looked like every person who came to court hoping the system would suddenly grow a heart. He did not know she had spent months reading the system from the inside. He did not know she had traced his patterns across precinct logs, hospital intake notes, courthouse records, and missing seconds in video files. He only knew that she had spoken to him, as if his badge did not end the conversation. Mercer looked from Naomi to the folder, then to the guard, whose hands had slowed over the federal seal. "What is the problem?" Mercer asked. The guard swallowed. "Sir, this appears to be official material." Mercer's jaw tightened. Then she should have said that. Naomi closed the briefcase with a soft click. "You never asked who I was," she said. The hallway seemed to lean toward them. Tasha held her daughter closer. Somewhere above them, the small black dome of a security camera watched without blinking. Mercer's eyes flicked toward it, then back to Naomi, and for the first time that morning, his badge looked less like armor and more like evidence. Naomi did not answer Mercer with a title, because titles were the language he trusted too much. Instead, she turned toward Tasha Reed and lowered her voice until it became something almost private in the middle of that cold public hallway. "Your hearing is in courtroom 4B, correct?" Tasha nodded, but her eyes kept jumping back to Mercer, to the guard, to the folder in Naomi's hand, as if every direction held a different kind of danger. "Then you need to go now," Naomi said. "You are not late yet." Tasha looked uncertain. Her little girl pressed closer, one small sneaker balanced on the edge of a yellow floor line near security. Mercer gave a short laugh through his nose. "Nobody goes anywhere until I say this is cleared." Naomi looked at him then, not sharply, not with drama, but with the steady attention of someone taking a statement without a recorder. "Officer Mercer," she said, "are you ordering a mother to miss a custody hearing because she stood behind me in line?" The question was plain. That made it dangerous. A few people nearby lifted their heads. The courthouse clerk with the coffee slowly lowered the cup. The guard stopped moving. Mercer's face tightened, not enough for most people to notice, but Naomi noticed everything. She noticed the way his thumb brushed the edge of his badge when he felt challenged. She noticed how he angled his body toward Tasha, but kept his eyes on Naomi. She noticed how power, when questioned, often pretended it was only procedure. "I am maintaining order," Mercer said. "Then maintain it fairly," Naomi replied. The hallway went quiet again, but this time the silence had weight. It was no longer the silence of people avoiding trouble. It was the silence of people realizing trouble had already arrived wearing polished shoes. Tasha swallowed and whispered, "Ma'am, I really cannot miss this. My daughter has been waiting 6 months for me to explain." Naomi's expression softened for the first time that morning. 6 months. She knew what 6 months could do to a family. 6 months could turn a child's room into a museum. 6 months could make a mother rehearse the same sentence until it lost its shape. 6 months could teach a little girl to ask careful questions because the grown-ups around her were always one document away from breaking. Naomi stepped aside just enough to open a path past the inspection table. "Go," she said. Mercer shifted, but the guard, perhaps hearing the word federal still echoing in his mind, lifted the gate rope without waiting for Mercer's approval. Tasha moved quickly, almost afraid the air itself would change its mind. Her daughter looked back once at Naomi, and in that glance there was no understanding of law, no knowledge of rank, only the instinct children have when someone has made the room safer. Mercer watched them disappear toward the elevators, his pride hardening like wet cement. "You think you are clever," he said. Naomi picked up her briefcase. "No," she said. "I think she was on time." Then she reached into the outer pocket of her coat, pulled out a small notepad, and wrote down his badge number without asking permission. Mercer saw the pen move. The sound was tiny, paper against ink, but it seemed to cut through the marble hallway more cleanly than any raised voice could have done. "What are you writing?" he asked. Naomi closed the notepad. "What happened?" Mercer stared at the closed notepad as if Naomi had taken something from him, something more personal than a number printed on metal. "You do not get to document me," he said. Naomi placed the notepad back into her coat pocket. "I document facts," she replied. That was when his pride made the decision his training should have stopped. "Full inspection," Mercer said, turning to the guard. "Everything out. Every folder. Every page." The guard looked at Naomi, then at the federal seal on the folder, clearly hoping someone else would speak first. Nobody did. The hallway had become a courtroom before the courtroom opened, and every person waiting in line had become a witness. Naomi set the briefcase down again. The marble beneath it was pale, polished, and cold enough to reflect the ceiling lights in long white strips. She unlocked the brass clasp with steady fingers, but Mercer stepped closer, eager now, impatient now, trying to reclaim the room by making her smaller inside it. "Careful," Naomi said again. The guard reached for the top folder, but Mercer cut in with his voice, sharp and performative. "No special treatment." His words startled the guard just enough that the folder slipped from his hand. Papers spilled across the floor in a soft white rush. Legal pages, witness summaries, timestamps, photographs turned face down. A sealed evidence inventory slid under the inspection table. The sound was not loud, but it carried. Paper against marble. A quiet kind of humiliation. Someone behind Naomi exhaled. Someone else whispered, then stopped. Mercer looked down at the scattered documents and allowed himself a small smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "People should keep their business in order before bringing it into federal court," he said. Naomi lowered herself to one knee and began gathering the pages one by one. She did not hurry. She did not apologize for the mess she had not made. The gray sleeve of her coat brushed the floor as she reached beneath the table for the evidence inventory. A young deputy nearby took half a step forward as if to help, then looked at Mercer and stopped. Naomi noticed that too. Fear had many uniforms. As she collected the pages, one sheet remained by Mercer's boot. The paper was marked with a case number and the words Civil Rights Division. Mercer saw the phrase, and for one thin second, the color drained from his confidence. Then he placed the toe of his polished boot lightly over the corner, not enough to damage it, just enough to make a point. Naomi looked at the boot, then up at him. No anger, no pleading, only memory. Her father's voice again. Never let them make you bend in spirit just because your hands are near the ground. That page belongs to the United States, Naomi said softly. The guard froze. The deputy looked up. Mercer removed his boot, but the damage was already done, not to the paper, to the story he thought he controlled. At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened behind him, and Victor Harlan, Mercer's attorney, stepped out in a navy suit with a leather trial bag in one hand. He took in the scattered documents, Naomi kneeling beside them, Mercer standing over the mess, and the black security camera fixed above the hallway. His expression changed before he could hide it. Daniel, Harlan said quietly, what exactly did you just do? Victor Harlan's question did not land like a shout. It landed like a door closing somewhere deep inside Mercer's chest. The attorney stood near the elevator with his trial bag still in his hand, eyes moving from the scattered pages to the security camera, then to Naomi's face. Mercer opened his mouth, but for once, the right words did not rush to serve him. She refused to identify herself, he said. Harlan's jaw tightened. That was not my question. Naomi finished collecting the final page and aligned the stack against the edge of her briefcase. The sound was small, paper tapping leather, but in the stillness it felt deliberate. She rose without drama. The gray coat had picked up a faint streak of dust at the knee, and she brushed it once, not because she cared how she looked, but because dignity had habits. Harlan took one step closer, lowering his voice. Ma'am, may I ask your name? Naomi looked at him. You may hear it in court. Mercer's eyes flicked toward Harlan, searching for outrage, support, anything familiar. He found only calculation. The attorney had defended officers for 22 years. He knew the difference between a citizen making noise and a federal case forming in real time. He looked again at the camera, then at the folder now tucked inside Naomi's briefcase. Daniel, he said quietly, go inside. Do not speak to anyone else. Mercer did not move. He hated that order because it sounded exactly like the kind he usually gave. Naomi turned toward the elevators, the old briefcase hanging from her hand. As she passed the young deputy, he stepped aside and gave her room. Not much, just a few inches, but it was the first respectful movement the hallway had offered her all morning. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Naomi entered alone. For a moment, she could still see Mercer through the narrowing gap, his badge bright under the lights, his face stiff with a fear he had not yet named. Then the doors closed. Silence. The elevator smelled faintly of metal polish and coffee. The lights above were too white, too cold, flattening everything into reflection. Naomi stood facing the doors, breathing slowly through her nose. Her hands did not shake until no one could see them. Then, just once, her fingers tightened around the handle of the briefcase. She looked down at the worn leather, at the scratches her father had never bothered to repair, at the brass lock rubbed smooth by decades of use. Inside, beneath the federal folder, lay his fountain pen. She opened the case just enough to touch it. Cold barrel. Familiar weight. A memory rose with it. Her father on a winter morning, tying his tie in the cracked mirror by the front door, telling her that the hardest thing about justice was keeping your heart soft after the world tried to make it stone. Naomi closed her eyes. She was angry. Of course she was angry. But anger was only fire, and fire without direction burned the house down before it lit the road. When the elevator climbed past the third floor, she took one deeper breath and let the air steady her. She was not there to humiliate Mercer. She was not there to win applause from strangers in a marble hallway. She was there for Tasha Reed. She was there for the names inside the folder. She was there for every report that had sounded official enough to bury someone's pain. The elevator slowed. Courtroom level. Naomi opened her eyes, adjusted the folder, and stepped forward before the doors fully parted. Beyond them waited wood panels, flags, microphones, and a room full of people who believed the morning's truth had not yet begun. They were wrong. The courtroom was already breathing before Naomi entered, a low human murmur moving under the high ceiling like air through an old pipe. Reporters sat along the back row with notebooks ready. A few officers in dress uniforms stood near the wall, their faces controlled, their shoulders squared, their loyalty arranged in silence. At the defense table, Victor Harlan unpacked his trial bag with careful hands, setting down folders, a tablet, and 2 yellow legal pads. Mercer sat beside him, facing forward, jaw tight, badge still bright, trying to rebuild himself inside the familiar shape of authority. He did not look at the door when Naomi walked in. Not at first. He assumed she would disappear into the gallery, another embarrassed citizen with a complaint, another person the building would swallow by noon. Then the room changed. It was subtle, but Mercer felt it before he understood it. A deputy near the bench straightened. The clerk looked up. Judge Eleanor Whitmore, silver-haired and sharp-eyed behind the bench, paused over the file in front of her. Naomi crossed the room without hurry, her old briefcase at her side, the dust marks still faint on the knee of her gray coat. She did not sit in the gallery. She did not approach the witness benches. She walked to the government table and placed the briefcase down with a quiet sound that seemed to travel farther than it should have. Mercer turned his head then. The recognition struck him slowly, then all at once. His eyes moved from Naomi's face to the government table, to the sealed folder, to the nameplate that had been placed there before anyone arrived. Assistant United States Attorney Naomi Coleman. Harlan leaned toward him and whispered something, but Mercer did not answer. The room had tilted, and every polished rule he trusted had shifted with it. The clerk rose. All rise. Chairs moved. Fabric rustled. The American flag behind the bench hung still in the warm light. Judge Whitmore took her seat and looked over the courtroom with the calm fatigue of a woman who had watched powerful people underestimate quiet ones for a very long time. Be seated, she said. The sound of everyone sitting came like a soft wave. Naomi opened her folder. Her father's fountain pen rested beside the first page. She touched it once, then stood. Good morning, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was clear, steady, and entirely different from the voice Mercer had tried to dismiss in the hallway. The United States is ready. Mercer swallowed. Across the aisle, Harlan's pen stopped moving. Judge Whitmore glanced at the file, then at Naomi. Proceed. Naomi turned slightly, just enough for the jury box, the gallery, and the defense table to see her face. This case is not about a single bad morning, she began. It is about a pattern hidden behind polished language, incomplete reports, missing context, and the assumption that a badge can make one person's word heavier than another person's truth. Mercer stared at the table. The badge on his chest suddenly felt too visible. Naomi lifted a small remote from beside her folder. The screen at the side of the courtroom flickered awake. Mercer expected an old body camera clip, maybe a traffic stop, maybe one of the recordings Harlan had promised they could explain. Instead, the first image showed the courthouse hallway from less than 20 minutes earlier. Naomi standing in a gray coat. Tasha Reed holding her daughter. Mercer blocking the security line with his hand on his badge. A hush moved through the courtroom, so complete that even the air conditioner seemed to lower its voice. Naomi did not look at Mercer when she spoke again. Your Honor, before we examine what Officer Mercer wrote in his reports, the United States would like the court to observe what he does when he believes no one important is watching. By late afternoon, the courtroom no longer felt like a place built from wood, stone, and law books. It felt like a room that had been forced to hold its breath until the truth finished speaking. The hallway video had played. The body camera clips had played. The missing seconds had been explained by a technician whose voice never rose above a calm, careful rhythm. Tasha Reed had testified without crying, which somehow made her words feel heavier. She did not perform her pain for the room. She simply told the truth, one sentence at a time, while Naomi stood nearby, never pushing, never turning a human wound into a spectacle. Mercer sat at the defense table with both hands folded, his badge no longer catching the light the way it had that morning. Under the soft gold glow from the windows, it looked smaller, almost ordinary, just a piece of metal pinned to a man who had mistaken authority for character. When Judge Eleanor Whitmore finally spoke, even the reporters stopped writing. Her voice was level, but it carried to the farthest corner. She ordered Mercer relieved of courtroom security privileges pending further proceedings, referred the evidence for review, and reminded everyone present that public trust was not a decoration pinned to a uniform. It had to be earned in the moments no one expected to matter. Mercer closed his eyes. Victor Harlan did not touch his shoulder. No one did. For once, there was no friendly hand, no whispered promise, no wall of silence rising around him. There was only the space between what he had believed about himself and what everyone had now seen. Slowly, Mercer reached up and removed the badge from his chest. The small metal clasp clicked open. It was a tiny sound, almost delicate, but it moved through the courtroom like the final note of a song nobody knew they had been waiting to hear. He placed the badge on the defense table. Metal touched wood. Naomi looked at it, then at him. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. Justice, her father had taught her, was not a parade. It was a door opening for people who had been kept outside too long. Mercer turned toward Tasha. His mouth moved once before sound came. "I was wrong," he said. The words were quiet, stripped of performance. Tasha held her daughter's hand and said nothing. She did not owe him forgiveness on his schedule. Naomi understood that better than anyone in the room. A few minutes later, the courthouse emptied into the pale Virginia evening. The marble steps were warm from the day's sun, and traffic hummed half a block away. Tasha stood near the bottom step with her daughter pressed against her side. Naomi passed them with the old briefcase in her hand. Tasha whispered, "Thank you." Naomi paused, gave a small nod, and said, "You made it on time." Then she walked down the steps alone, the gray coat moving softly in the breeze, her father's briefcase swinging at her side, while behind her, inside a federal courtroom, a badge lay silent on a wooden table, finally lighter than the truth.